Okay, you're welcome once again to this presentation, and this time around we are talking about quantitative research designs and methodologies. We need to quickly understand that this is just an aspect of quantitative research as an approach to finding solutions to puzzles and problems in the society and the system in general. I'll quickly talk about the meaning of quantitative research design, the meaning of quantitative research methodology in a way to show the difference between these two aspects of quantitative activities. So, question: the need for research design. In other words, we are going to look at why we have to think about research design in any quantitative research process. Then we talk about types of quantitative research designs and forms of quasi-experimental design. We take special time to talk about this because it is the most commonly used quantitative research design by researchers in education and social sciences. Then we look at some designs and their representations. And then finally, I will talk about factors that affect internal validity of research designs. So, meaning of quantitative research design, simply a quantitative research design is seen as a standard, objective, and a systematic design that involves numerical data applied in generating information to solve specific problems that have been identified as either plaguing a system or a society. And we want to determine quantitatively using numbers to get out the factors and thereby make meaning to such solutions. Quantitative research titles actually compare groups or relate variables, simply meaning that they look into variables such as the dependent and independent variables, what kind of relationship that is found among them, and what is the meaning, what will be the effect of such a relationship between these groups and variables. They test, they predict, they explain, and describe phenomena and their issues. Then what do we mean by quantitative research methodology? It is basically scientific method of doing research. A quantitative research methodology uses deductive reasoning as opposed to the approach we use in qualitative research, where we talk about inductive reasoning. The methods enables the researcher to raise some intelligent guesses, otherwise known as hypotheses, about a given observed event or phenomena or problem. By that, the hypothesis is to help direct areas of search that will make meaning and profile solutions to the existing problem. The method also helps to collect appropriate data about the problem. It creates an avenue to be able to analyze the data using appropriate statistical tool to prove whether the hypothesis is acceptable, supported, or otherwise, and draws conclusion on possible solution to the problem. In order to achieve this, we have several steps for a good scientific method that can be applied in the search of solutions to problems quantitatively. Number one is observation of the phenomenon that is being talked about. What is the problem? Searching around to determine what the problem could be. Then two is to formulate hypotheses, which I have earlier alluded to as intelligent guesses to explain the phenomenon. Then three is to design experiments to test the stated hypothesis. Four, performing the experiments to generate data upon which the hypothesis may be accepted, rejected, or modified. However, I will quickly talk about this word rejected. I've placed it in this discussion because many other older books will be talking about hypothesis being rejected. Presently, we have come to a point that hypothesis may not just be outrightly rejected, but may not be accepted, which could be as according to the data generated. And the nature of the data generated may be as a result of the approach used by the researcher. So, if an hypothesis is not accepted, then you are better placed to say the hypothesis may not or could not be accepted, and then an alternative hypothesis thereby stated. And then you come up with conclusion, presenting the findings to the appropriate audience. By this, I mean publishing your findings in appropriate journal, and those who are expected to be in that field will have access to it. That is the appropriate audience. Then why do we need research design in quantitative research process? There are many reasons which I want to quickly summarize as follows. One, it enables a researcher to quantitatively describe dependent and independent variables that come up as the features for any researchable title in quantitative research. Two, it helps to provide an avenue to evaluate and test relationships among the variables. And three, to determine the cause and effect interactions. And this is so important because this stands as the underlying factor for quantitative research. It also helps to give credibility to the results of a given research. And such results, such level of credibility required is supposed to bring about increased maximum efficiency and reliability of data generated. And then it acts as a firm foundation for the entire research. Here I'm using the term firm foundation, otherwise I can say it is the scaffold of a given research. Because if the scaffold of a building is not firm, then whatever you are placing on that building certainly is going to collapse. Therefore, research design quantitatively stands in this role. It helps to determine the type of analysis and testing of hypotheses to be done with the data collected. A good research design is a pointer to the type of a statistical tool that could be used in determining what the solution could be, making sense out of the data collected. Then we consider certain factors when we want to choose research design. We do not just choose research design because perhaps we love some names about some of the research designs, but the following factors must be taken into cognizance. One is, what aim or objective are you having about the study? So you think about the aims and objectives of the study. You also think about what kind of hypothesis. Am I using hypothesis only for this study? Or am I going to use only research questions? Or am I going to use both of them? That is, research questions and hypothesis. In most cases, when you use both research questions and hypotheses, it helps to tell you that you may be needing some extra activity, combination of both quantitative and qualitative aspects of research. And we summarize that by saying the person tends to make use of mixed methods. Then another big factor is the role of the researcher. We need to avoid any form and every form of bias as much as we can as researchers. The type of design you are going to choose may either lead to such bias, which I'll talk about after some slides, or you come up with credibility that yes, you are far from such bias. Now, what are the types of research designs that we like using in quantitative research? The first I'm going to talk about is descriptive. And someone may say, but why talking about descriptive at this point? Because we know quite well that in qualitative research, descriptive approach is more of what we use. However, there are case studies, naturalistic, observation, and survey research designs encapsulated in quantitative research, such that the approach to such case studies, naturalistic, observation, survey, all these you are going to come out with figures, and these figures can only be interpreted using some statistical tools, not just such tools as we use in qualitative analysis like the Atlas TI and others, but more stringent quantitative statistical tools. Then two, we have correlational research designs. Again, you can do correlational studies under case study, observational study. What is there is that you are coming out with determining how much a given variable is related to the other, and nothing more than that. You are looking at the correlational value and not the cause, mainly to say this, because this has happened, therefore that must be the result, or this result is as a result of this other. Is it going on? Okay. So then we come to semi-experimental design. And here you talk about, I'll give some examples, such as field experiment, quasi-experiments. These are semi-experimental design. Then we have pre-experimental designs, such as one-shot, or what we call and describe as one group post-test only design. You have multi-group post-test only design. We have longitudinal case design. We have one group pre-test, post-test design. All these are pre-experimental designs. And then we have the experimental design itself, where we have a key point that makes a difference between the experimental designs and the pre-experimental design and semi-experimental design. Examples of experimental design include experiment with random assignments of the subjects, such as randomized controlled trials. This is a special experimental design, and we use the acronym of RTC to quickly tell us that that is what we're talking about. One rigorous experimental design I love talking about is Solomon 4 group design. It is rigorous, more rigorous than our usual quasi-experimental design. And not only that, its application is more open in the hardcore sciences such as computer science, chemistry, physics, mathematics, biology, or life science in their natural form. Then we have the switching replications design. Let's not forget that we still have some other designs such as review, in which case we talk about literature review, systematic review, and then we have meta-analytic design, then ex post facto design. I've taken time to look at just a few of these designs, not all that I've mentioned I want to talk about now, but quickly let's talk about descriptive design. The reason for choosing this is because I've come to a point in my, as I started this discussion, that there are certain activities we go out for by way of research, and we say we want to use mixed method approach, and you will do some aspect of qualitative that will bring about proper description of what has happened, and then you go out for the real figures, to use in triangulating what you have discussed qualitatively. So the first choice I have here is descriptive design, and this describes the issues or problems at hand. Descriptive design provides systematic information about an event or problem. It may not necessarily start with hypothesis, but has the ability of generating hypotheses after all. This is what should be taken very important. When you are talking about descriptive design, don't just wake up with an hypothesis, because that will make your observation to be parochial. You judge as according to what you have formulated in your mind, instead of according to what you have seen. Example of descriptive design study can be seen in the description of grade 10 learners' perception about probability. Description of grade 10 learners' perception. It could be you may remove perception and put interest, you may put attitude, and so on. But as long as these are talking about construct issues, then the best design you will think about is descriptive. Then we have correlational design. This design statistically determines the extent of relationship between and among two or more variables. And with such statistical tools like your Spearman correlational coefficient, Spearman-Browns correlational coefficients, and the likes, you will be able to say that this parameter is to this extent related to this other one. It takes no account it takes account of the trends and patterns in the data collected. When you have collected your data, it is possible as you go through, you see either there is a special level of agreement or disagreement among the data that you have generated. Correlational design does not deal with cause and effect of any observation, and the variables are not manipulated. Simply speaking, you cannot manipulate any of the variables. You allow the variables as they are, and then check out what relationship that exists among them, instead of coming out to say what has happened is as a result of this cause. Then semi-experimental, or what I describe as quasi-experimental design. This, as opposed to correlational design, is called causal comparative design. It determines cause and effect relationship. This is the key issue about quasi-experimental design. Now, different from true experimental design, because the independent variable is only identified in quasi-experimental design and not manipulated by the researcher, while the dependent variable is measured. So the independent variable, which could be like the teaching approach, is what you have identified, and then you want to measure the students' performance. You want to measure the students' achievements, and that you can do because it is a dependent variable. In quasi-experimental design, there is no randomization that is allowed, but groups are used in their natural formulations, and such is called the intact class. While talking about quasi-experimental design, we need to be careful to reduce possible extraneous variables that could affect the findings of the study. Extraneous variables are so many, and right there, I'm going to talk about them after this. But let's take examples of the nature of quasi-experimental topics. That from the topics the title, you can quickly know that this research will require quasi-experimental design. One example is effect of gender on learners' achievement in algebra. It could be in any other subjects, any of the sciences, any of the technology areas. Then you talk about the impact of, the influence of. The idea here is that we want to measure what has happened as a result of taking a particular action. That is the cause and effect relationship we talk about. Now, what are the forms of quasi-experimental designs? One is to think about the non-equivalent group design. Usually, non-equivalent group design stands out when we are considering quasi-experimental designs. So to think of this, the groups must be as similar as possible. Then this helps to minimize all the possible extraneous variables. as I said, I will be talking about. Then we also must remember that we have pre-test, post-test design as a form of quasi-experimental design. Then we have the interrupted time series design with multiple pre-tests and multiple post-tests. The good thing about this design, this form of quasi-experimental design, is that it provides greater confidence that the change in the dependent variable was not caused by the manipulation and not just a random fluctuation. This has been supported by many other researchers, including Oswald. Then we have the static group comparison control design. Static group control design. This I will briefly talk about when I look at the representations. So quickly, let's consider some design representations. In general, I have classified all possible quantitative research designs into 3 classes of representation. We have in the first class where you have post-test only randomized experiments. And here you see R with X and the 0 there. What R means is the randomized group, and then the X there is talking about where the treatment is. And then this other is the post-test activity that you will be doing. Now, the second R without X in between is showing the control group. Then we have the pre-test, post-test, non-equivalent groups, quasi-experimental designs. All these you see in that second group. There you see N there is saying simply that no randomization has taken place, and that makes it truly quasi-experimental. Now, looking at this and the first group, you find that instead of R, here we are having 0x0 in the representation and 0 without any X in between and another 0. The meaning is that you have the post-test, the pre-test, and then you go on with your treatment, and then come back with the post-test. While in the control group, no treatment takes place. But the same pre-test you have given to the other group, you also give to them. And the same post-test, you also give to them when you think you are done with your treatment with the experimental group. And then the last group is the post-test only non-experimental design. Here, you have no pre-test. You come up with what you think is your intervention after you have done your literature, and then you say, okay, this is, I just want to see, I've seen from the literature I did that there's this kind of problem, and I think I should solve the problem using this approach. As you do that, you now can administer your post-test and then see the effect of your treatment. So here I have the one short case study, in which case I have the treatment and then straight to testing the subjects if the treatment I've given to them has any effect or not. Then the multiple group post-test group design. Here I've taken just 4 groups to say. You can have more than 4, you can have 3, you can have any number of groups, but certainly it must be more than 2 groups. And in each of them, you are applying a particular treatment. Cases that bring about the choice of this research design will be according to the number of independent variables that you are working with in different groups. Then we have the longitudinal case study. This is quite interesting, where you follow up a particular group in different years, perhaps, or terms, or semesters, but a particular group until a given number of time that you want. Example is, you see there is treatment on group 1, and then at a given time, let's say T1, then that same group, you continue to treat them after you have given tests in the first one, and then you say, this is what I found. You keep the record and then proceed to the second treatment, level of treatment. Take your test, proceed to the third level of treatment until you are done with what exactly you want to do, and then you do your analysis. Then we have the one group pre-test, post-test design. Here you have just one group. You come to that group, take the pre-test to enable you do your preliminary case study about the group to determine the characteristics, whatever they have known before you start your treatment. And after your treatment, you also give them the same test to enable you determine the effects. Then we have that which I told you in the previous slides, that is called static group comparison or comparison group post-test only design. This is one of the 2 group comparison designs that are described to be static. And what makes it static? It is static when you have a particular, let's say you have a particular class you are working on, that you are looking at first year chemistry or first year mathematics students in a particular institution. You want to see an approach of teaching, how it has helped them in understanding a particular topic that many people have found difficult. And then you make use of your treatment on that group. And then this other group that you are using to compare with your experimental group, you come with that same test you are going to give them without teaching them the same way this other one has been taught. In such a case, you are using the very first one I've described here as the comparison group post-test only design. And then issues about this, we include, we mean that all steps as a pre-test, post-test design, but the pre-test is omitted, as I've explained. So it controls most of the threats that are usually surrounding post-test, pre-test activities. So such threats are like the internal and external validities of the pre-test. So it eliminates the threats of pretesting, and then the best analytical tool for this type of design, study done with this type of design, is the t-test. However, we must understand that the use of this design is vulnerable to different subject characteristics. Subjects I mean here are the learners or students that are involved. The second type of static group comparison is described as comparison group pre-test, post-test design, otherwise known as cross-sectional study design. Here you have the pre-test and then you have the post-test. And there is a treatment for the pre-test, one group with treatment, and then this other one without treatment. The good note about this is about the gain score, which is not determined when we use the first post-test only static group comparison design. Gain score is calculated by subtracting the pre-score value from the post-test score, and that difference is what is analyzed as the final score, while the pre-score will always stand as a covariance. And the special tool that can help in doing this analysis is ANCOVA, analysis of covariance. There are threats that come against validity of research designs, and all these threats put together are summarized here. Every program that is registered, program not as a cause, but program as a problem, needs to be observed in order to determine what is the cause. So looking at this diagram here, I have program and then observations to my right. So under program, the question there is, what do we do with this? What are you going to do with that kind of problem that you have seen? Is there any alternative way of solving the problem? If you use a particular approach, what do you think you are going to see? And that's your observation. By the time you use an alternative approach because you have seen a possible alternative cause, are you going to have the same observation as you had in the past? Of course, no. And that makes us to see that we have alternative causes, and then there should be different effects of such on the data collected. So in order to understand the validity of our research, we consider these traits. And so I'm looking at factors that affect internal validity of our research designs. One is history. History here is not a subject. History is the information available about the work that is being done between the first time of measurement and the second time of measurement. For instance, if I have measured the ability of students to solve a particular problem just in a short while ago. And then I give out my intervention. Immediately I come back to give that same test to them, not giving enough time. Certainly, the residual knowledge will be a strong one. And then their performance at that second test may not actually show that indeed they have known the approach I have taught them. If the same test is to be given to them 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, I am likely to find a difference in level of performance. And that is where history comes in. The maturation of participants with time. We need to understand that someone of 1 year old today, in the next year is already 2 years, and so on. Our level of maturation depends on time and experience that we are sharing from as the time passes. So the issue of maturation is usually more critical when we consider such studies with longitudinal cases. Then testing effects. Testing effects is just as I've discussed under history. The methods of your testing may influence the type of data you are going to collect. If you have done like in the first test using pre-test, and then you come with the same questions which supposed to be, but not juggled around, not placed in a way that this the subjects will not be able to say, oh, it was number one. This question was number one here yesterday. Today it is still number one. And with a close study, they can just pour down what they stated yesterday down on your paper, and you mark to see that they are having the same results. And by that, the data you are generating in the second test becomes of non-effect. Then we have instrumentation. What kind of disposition do you observe among your learners or those people you are using as subjects, and then among the observers you are using, the scorers you are using? The simple truth here is that the disposition of an examiner or a marker or observer will certainly affect his or her ability to judge right or wrong of issues. Then we have statistical regression. Regression to the mean can also affect the internal validity of a particular research design. And then bias in selection of participants. Some researchers make up their mind, this exactly is the type I want to, because they have focused their mind saying that this is the end of the results, it must be this. And then they compose their participants, the sample, only working towards that particular planned results. And such is no more a good research. Then we have experimental mortality. When you have a given research you are doing, and for many years you are still on it, outside the bounds of time limits. By the time you finish, it will no longer be solving the problem that it ought to have solved when you started the research. So every research, particularly quantitative research, must make sure that the lifespan of the activities to be undertaken is kept within manageable time. And then we have the cotton effects. Here, As I said in the previous slides, we have various factors described as photon effects that can affect the type of data we have and the nature of our activities in the research fields. A very good example is John Henry effects. We talk about experimental effects. And more than this, I want to quickly say that when a researcher goes out to the field and goes to tell his audience, those that will be using as his sample, say, look, what I am doing with you, I am having you as my experimental group, and then the other set of people there are there to be the control group. Then the possibility of mixing up with these people is there, which brings contamination to the type of results that you will have. Having said this, I will refer you to these references and acknowledgements that I've placed at the end of this presentation. Thank you for listening.